Hello, my name is Tyler Ross, and in this tutorial I will be showing you tips and tricks to creating UV maps in Maya. In order to start creating UV maps, we have to first be in modeling mode. You can change the modeling mode by going to the top left and selecting modeling. You'll notice that many of the options on the top have changed. We can now access the UV editor. If this is your first time opening the UV editor, the UV toolkit might not have opened up with it. To open it, simply go to the UV editor, Tools, and your option here will be to show the UV toolkit. From here I recommend selecting the checker box picture. This will allow us to better see our UVs later on in the tutorial. Now we can take the UV editor and click the top to drag. Move it off to the right, and when you see the blue line, release. This allows us to dock the UV editor with the rest of the viewport. We can do the same with the UV toolkit. The purpose of this tutorial is to show two different methods to creating UV maps using these bedroom lamps. To start, we're going to focus on one of the lamps, and we're going to hide the lamp high layer and the lamp base layer. You can now select the lamp base and click F to focus on to the object. In order to start creating the UVs, we now have to go to UV planar, and we're going to select the option box to the right. This will show us our options for the planar mapping. We're going to select the Z-axis projection and hit apply. From here you'll notice that we've created our first UV island in the UV editor. With the checker box option clicked, we will see these UV checkers show up in the UV editor and on the viewport. By rotating around the object, we can see that there is some distortion on the object in the UVs. This is because there's no real seams yet created on the object in order to unfold the UVs around. As such, our Z-axis planar projection shows relatively well, but when viewed from the X-axis or the Y-axis, there's no information for the model to show of the UVs. Now we have to start creating the seams so that we can unfold the object. By holding down the right click, going to Edge, we will select the edges that we want to create seams on. We'll start by selecting this edge, by double clicking it. We'll then also select the edge up here, the edge here, and the edge up at the top. You can select all the edges by holding down Shift while double clicking those edges so that we don't lose any of our selections. With the mouse now over the UV editor, we can hit Shift X, which will cut the edges and create seams. You'll notice in both the UV editor and the viewport that where the seams are, they are represented by white lines, in contrast to the blue lines that are not cut. To progress from here, we now have to create a seam on the back of the object that goes vertically and will allow us to unwrap the object. When I double click the edge in the back to select all the edges going from the bottom of the model to the top. We will then deselect a few of the edges that we do not need to create a seam on. By holding Control and dragging around the edges that we don't need, we will deselect them. Now that we only have the edges that we want selected, we will again put our cursor over the UV editor and hit Shift X to create our seam. Again, you will notice that where the seam is, there is now a white line instead of the green or blue lines representing where there is no seams. Now in our UV toolkit, we will go to the Unfold option and the Arrange and Layout option. With the faces selected, we will now double click on the faces up here and we will select the entire UV island. Just by double clicking, it will select all the available faces up until any severed edges are. With that selected, we can now go to unfold along and make sure that is selected the U value. What this does is it straightens out the UVs along the U axis, which is left and right. You'll notice that the squares on the UVs have been made uniform. With that done, we can drag this out so that is no longer in our way. We'll next be selecting the UVs for the main part of the base by double clicking again. We'll also unfold along the U axis, and we'll notice that for the most part we have good UV topology now. However, where the seam is, you'll notice that the UVs start to turn into the seam, creating a distortion in itself. In order to get rid of this, we are going to select the Straighten UVs option below the Unfold Along. After a bit of calculating, the UVs will be turned into a rectangular shape, and you will notice that we no longer have the UVs along the seam bending into itself. Now that that is done, we will drag that out too. Finally, we are going to drag the rest of the objects, or we will select the rest of the objects that we have not yet fixed. We're going to go back to UV Planar and select the options. This time we're going to project from the Y axis and hit apply. Now the information for the planar is going from the top. So you can see the UVs these UVs when projected from the top look a lot more uniform. In order to unfold these to make sure that they properly deformed, we are going to have our mouse in the UV editor hit Control U. This will do a quick unfold on the selected UVs. It is important to have a good quality sizes for our UVs. We don't want some of the UVs to be too much bigger than the others. In order to fix this, we will select the different UVs and try to make them uniform with the rest of the model. So we're going to select this lower base of the UVs, hit R to go into our scaling option. We're going to scale the option down till the UVs become uniform with the rest of the model. Then we're going to drag it out of the way and select the next part. Again, we can hit F to focus on our selection in the viewport. Again, we're going to hit R to go to our scale mode and scale the UVs down so that they fit with the rest of the object, and then move it. Finally, we're going to select our last piece, F, to focus, and again, scale the UVs. With that, the UVs for this base of the lamp is complete. We will go to our object mode now and select the shade for the lamp. Now we're going to do the same process, where we're going to go to UV, Planar, and again, project from the Z axis. Like with the base, the projection from the Z axis is good, but when looked at from the X or Y, there are become issues. We're going to again hold our right mouse button, go to Edges, and select the areas that we want to create our seams. We'll do so by selecting the innermost edge on the top, holding Shift and selecting the outermost edge, and then doing the same at the bottom of the lamp shade. Again, we will now go over the UV editor and hold Shift X to create our seams. Then go to our Faces option and double click on the UV islands to create or to select all the faces for this outside of the lampshade. We'll hit unfold along on the U axis. I made one mistake there, where I forgot to create our seam along the edges. So, we're going to go to the back of the object, and we're going to again go to Edges and double click the edge, and then create our seam using Shift X. Now that we have a proper seam to unfold along, we're going to go back, select the edges. This time we have selected the inside of the shade. We're going to unfold along. You'll notice that the lampshade has properly unfolded, and just like the base of the lamp, the UVs bend into themselves. So again, we're going to use straighten UVs to turn this into a rectangular shape. Because of the mistake earlier, the UVs for the outer side of the lampshade have been smushed together. So we'll have to manually select them. Now that they're selected, we can use unfold along on the U and straighten UVs to once again fix this. Finally, the only things that we have to UV are the top strip that we created and the bottom strip. You can select them, go to UV, planar, and project from the y-axis. Now, just like with the lamp base, we'll have to scale these in order to and use Control U to use a quick unfold. Finally, we have to scale them to match the UVs for the rest of the object. Now that we have the UVs done for both the lamp base and the lamp shade, we need to make sure that both the UV sets are scaled to be equal to each other. As you can see, the UVs for the lamp shade are a lot smaller than on the lamp base. This means that more texture space is being given to the lamp shade. In order to fix this, with both objects selected, you put your mouse over the UV editor and go to Faces. This will allow us to select both objects in the UV editor and manipulate them in the UV editor. I'm going to select all the UVs for the lampshade by double clicking on the lampshade, and then using our scale tool to scale them down so that they become uniform with the lamp base. We're also going to save a little bit of texture space by selecting the UVs for the inside of the lampshade and scaling that down more. Finally, with all the UVs islands selected, we're going to go to our UV toolkit, and where we opened up the Arrange and Layout, we're going to select Layout. This will pack all of the UVs inside of the 1x1 tile square for the UV editor. This is where all information needs to be in order to properly bake and texture the object. So by looking at the object, we can see that some issues weren't, or some things didn't go as properly as we hoped. For example, the base of the lamp, the UVs seem to be a bit smaller still than the rest of the UV or the lampshade. In order to bring them up, we're going to select just the lamp base. We're going to scale it up. We're then going to select all the objects again and do another layout. Now the lamp seems to be properly scaled with the UVs, and we can call this a day. The next method for creating UVs will be done on our lamp base layer. We're going to hide the lamp base too. For this method, I'm going to show you ways to share UV space so that we can make the UVs bigger without to allow for more details without using too much space of the UV map. To begin with, we're going to go to the lamp base, and what we're going to start out with is selecting all of the faces for this object by double clicking. We are then going to hold Control and select two vertically touching faces and double click to unselect that strip. We're then going to do the same for the UVs to the right. Now this is an important step, and it might not make sense at first, but from here I'm going to hit Control backspace to delete all of the faces besides the ones that we unselected. The purpose of this is to create UVs for just these faces, and then we're going to reduplicate them around the object so that they're all sharing the same UV space, and then move the excess UVs off to the sides. This will allow us, by sharing the UVs, to put more detail into just these UVs, but not diminishing the amount of textures for the rest of the object. So for now we are going to go back to UV planar and project from the Z-axis on these faces. Then going to unfold along the U-axis, and again we're going to do the same method that we did last time by creating our seams. So we're going to create our seams at the base, where this part juts out, where this connects to the final piece going to the top, and finally where it reaches the top. And we're going to hold Shift X over the UV editor to create the seams. We are then going to take the selections, make sure that they're unfolded, straightened, and moved off to the sides. And then for the remaining parts, we're going to go back to UV, planar, and project from the Y-axis. We're going to unfold along the U-axis to make sure that these are uniform. And then we're going to select them all and go to Orient Shells to make sure that they are straight. Again, these UVs are much bigger than the other ones, so we need to scale them down individually so that they match with the rest of the objects. Then we're going to move all these objects out of the way. You should already be able to notice by now that the UVs for just this part take up a lot less space than the previous model's UVs. However, when this object is duplicated around, all of the information from these UVs will be shared, allowing us to UV the entire object with only this amount of space. For now, we're going to simply lay these out, and then again move them off to the side using this scaling. We're going to use a similar method now on the lampshade. We're going to Faces, selecting everything, and then selecting two adjacent vertical faces and double clicking the second one so that we can deselect that entire edge loop. Then use Control backspace to delete all of the excess faces. We are then going to select all the faces once again by double clicking, but we're going to use Control click on this back face to deselect that. We're then going to go to UV, planar, and on Z-axis apply. We'll now unfold along the U axis, and then select the V axis and unfold along. There's some distortion here, so we'll have to do another unfold along on the U axis. This will properly straighten our UVs so that there's no distortion. Now move this out of the way, and select the remaining face, and again, go to planar. This time, because we're already on the Z axis projection, we can just hit planar. Now we'll unfold along the U axis, and with that, we're done. It's very simple, but there's a method to the madness. Now, with both of these objects selected, we're going to once again take both, select all the faces for both objects, and do a layout. As you can see, the UVs for both of these objects are pretty uniform already, so we don't have to mess with the scaling. Now we need to duplicate these faces so that we can properly go back to the original model. To do this, we're going to go to our object select this, holding Control D to duplicate. This object was originally 20 faces, and for the base part we've selected, we deleted all but 2. This means we need to duplicate it a total of 9 times. In order to do this, so we know that we have to rotate this 36 degrees to be perfectly even with each piece. When we hit Control D for the first time, Maya starts to save all the information that we do from that point, so that if we duplicate again, it can reiterate that process for us without us having to go through the same steps. So now, if we hit Shift D, you'll notice that the duplicates rotate by 36 degrees each time. And we can do this until we get our full model back. Now we can select this all these pieces, go to Mesh, Combine, to combine it into one object. Here we will notice that there's all the seams still persist, and if we select the UVs, you'll notice that all of them are still being properly registered, meaning that any information that happens to be along these faces will be shared along these faces, and these faces accordingly around the entire object. Now that we've combined the model back into itself, we have to combine all the vertexes. So we're going to go to Vertex, select all of the vertexes, and holding Shift, right click, going to go to Merge Vertices and Merge Vertices. This will allow our vertices to be merged so that we can, they are proper manifold geometry on the object. And with that, our lamp base is complete. In order to get rid of these lines, we can simply select the object, go to Mesh Display, and Soften Edge. Now we will do the same with the lampshade. Again, this was separated into 20 different sections along the entire object. However, we only have one section here, so when we hit Control D to duplicate, we have to now rotate it by 18 degrees. And again, we can hit Shift D to continue this around. Now, just like the lamp base, we're going to select all of the lampshade pieces, minus the lamp base, go to Mesh, Combine, and go to Vertices, select all the vertices, Shift, left or right click, Merge Vertices, Merge Vertices. Then go to Object Mode, Mesh Display, Soften Edge. Now we're going to bring up the lamp base 2 layer again. And with both selected, we can compare the UVs for both. Both models have their UVs in their proper channels in this 1x1 grid. So both of them will properly gain detail during a bake and textures. However, you'll notice that on the object that we divided and have shared UVs, the UVs are much smaller, meaning that we are achieving greater detail inside the UVs. Neither one of these methods is more correct than the other. Depending on the stipulations of the model that you're using, you may be fine just using the normal UV method. Going through the access states of dividing up the object and merging the UVs so that they're all shared may be overkill and not necessary. However, if you need a lot of detail and you don't have a lot of UV space, this is definitely the better method. The only thing left for this object is that we have all of these UVs overlaid on top of each other, and that's an issue when it comes to baking and texturing. In order to fix this, we have to select all of the faces, select both objects, and then right-click faces over the UV editor so that we can select the objects. So we're going to select all of the faces for both objects. We're then going to choose which islands we want to stay so that we'll keep all the detail on those so then they can be properly shared across all, and move the rest of them off to the side. In order to do this, we're going to take this face and double click this face so that we unselect all of those faces in our UVs. We'll do the same for the lamp base by deselecting these and these. Now, if you'll notice, if we drag these, all the rest of the UVs move, but the ones that we have unselected don't. I'm going to move those back for now. In our UV toolkit, we're going to go to Transform, and where it says Move, make sure that this is set to a value of 1. You can now hit the right arrow here, and you'll notice that it moves all of those UV islands over to the right by 1 UV tile. These UVs still match up because these UV tiles are simply tiled, meaning the information that would be put on these faces are being put on these faces, which would also be put on the faces if it was duplicated and moved over here, or even up here. This is a nice trick for making sure that we don't put too much detail on shared faces. Because if these UVs were still on top of these, if we tried to use a method in Substance Painter, for example, that put detail by affecting a height value on those UVs, would apply that on each one of those UVs, which means that there's the possibility that it could be different on those faces for each section. So the information that went on this face might be different from the ones that on this face, but because they're shared, it would double down and apply on both. By making sure that we only have one UV island in this section, we can make sure that any information that goes on here is shared on here, but there's no possible way to accidentally put information on here, which would then be shared back onto our original UVs. So with that, the UV process is complete. The reason we originally took two of these faces going vertically was so that in our high poly model we'd properly be able to get these indents where we have detail. For that reason, it's important to always have your high quality or high poly model, or at least have an idea of how you're going to be setting it up so that you can properly UV the way you need to. If we only selected one of the faces going vertically for this object, we would not be able to properly get this detail, which is going every other face. if we were to grab it on one of the faces that were indented, it would also indent where it should not. On the opposite side, if we didn't have it on where the faces were indented, there would never be an indent because all of it's shared. So with that, the tutorial for UV mapping is complete. I've shown you a method to doing a normal UV unwrap, which simply takes all the faces, unwraps them, and packs them up to be used. I've shown you a trick for maximizing UV space by sharing the UV spaces on multiple faces. Again, with this method, we were able to achieve greater detail in the UVs while also reducing the amount of UV space needed. As you can see in this map, there's an entire section of unused space that could be used for adding in another object if you needed to cut down on UV space, so that you could texture multiple objects and only use one material for both objects. This was my tutorial. Thank you for watching, and I hope you learned something.